Hi, welcome. This is my first time presenting over here at this event, Podcamp. My name is Michael Lee, and what I do for a living, I help make cartoons for children's programming. I've been a CG modeler, that's my job title. I've been a CG modeler, for a good almost 18 years. Now, 12 years, I've been working under contract at DHX Animation here in Halifax. And it's been a really good journey in terms of like a career choice that I chose. And, it was closer to what I loved, which is art. Whether it's drawing and painting too as well. So today, what I'd like to talk about is the open source 3D animation package called Blender. Yeah. I first took notice of Blender back in 1999 in a magazine for computer graphics, and I thought, wow, could it be possible if there's such a program with so many features that can be had for free, and yeah, Blender is one of them too as well. But throughout, I always kept Blender at the back of my mind because it was always in development, particularly for a free program, and I always kept it in the back of my mind, checked the Blender scenes every now and then too as well. But throughout most of the years that I've known Blender, I've never heard or seen a love-hate relationship with any particular software, and particularly Blender, with any other professional 3D application used in Hollywood. It just works. It works for the production studio's pipeline nicely for what they need to do. So. Yeah, I've never seen a love-hate relationship specifically, and it's reflected in things online, such as these too as well, that we can laugh about because many people who have tried Blender, downloaded Blender, installed it on their computer, and then tried it out, and then they find that sometimes some of the features, it was really lacking, not up to their expectations, particularly from professional computer graphics artists, who were expecting a lot more of what they used to with, in comparison to, let's say, like Maya, which is used in, a lot of films and also TV, 3D Studio Max in game studios too as well. So yeah, but the consensus here, is that, well, a lot of the complaints have been, usability. The user interface, looks very complicated. It doesn't look like Windows, it doesn't look like any other software too as well that they're used to as well. And they feel that the user interface is such, with such difficulty, it's hard to learn, So and I find that, just in life in general, everything has a learning curve, It's just that you need to, just get to know whatever platform, whatever program it is, and try to understand best. I know we have limited time, and trying to make the best of times. But at the same time, a lot of people, feel that Blender could be a whole lot improved too as well. So, yeah. So this is the general sentiment that I sense from the Blender community, especially from people who are not familiar with Blender, but I'm taking a page from Sideshow Bob from The Simpsons, and just say, oh, it's German for the Blender the, So throughout this talk, I'm going to explain why Blender still exists, much to the bane of the community that feels that Blender shouldn't be existing at all because there are other pieces of software in the professional 3D market that's far superior to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain why Blender exists in 5 points. Now 4 points, they may seem to be just obvious points for the qualities of this particular software. So let me go about and give you a little bit of background. Blender, has been downloaded 500,000 times per month, which gives us, 6.5 million downloads total of last year of 2017. So, but mind you, Blender has had, a long development and a long history too as well. Particularly, it's free and it's open source too as well. So, here is the gentleman who created Blender. His name is Tom Roosendahl. He created it back in 1994 as an in-house proprietary animation program for a small studio in Amsterdam, Netherlands, that he helped found it. Yeah, he's currently the chairman of the Blender Foundation, which is a non-profit organization, and he allowed Blender to become open source in 2002. So, without further ado, we can talk about the first point of why Blender exists, and we can talk about quickly about the features, what Blender offers as a 3D modeling animation program. So we can start off with, it has a wide array of modeling tools. You're working with polygon meshes in order to sculpt, make your models, your 3D models. You can manipulate it with your vertices, the points, the lines that connect between the points, the edges, and even the polygon faces, which comprises of the squares, that make up the whole surface of your model too as well. You got an array of tools, your sculpting tools like your chisels, like your extrusions, just to create more and more polygons to make your model bigger or smaller too as well. Manipulate the size and make it look beautiful. Once with the finishing touches, you add bells just to make it look polished too as well. You can import from a wide array of file formats too as well, even from other programs too as well. So the next, it has a full sculpting tool, just like what 3D artists use currently with ZBrush too as well. You can sculpt, you can make fine points of details too as well. You can be as detailed as you need to be too as well. And it's intuitive. It's almost like actually sculpting with your massive arsenal of chisel tools, like a real sculptor does for real sculpting. And then with the modeling, you want to make it look good. So, that's where texturing comes in. And texturing defines the look of your 3D models, whether you want to make it look like metal, you want to make it look like silk, and a whole variety of materials too as well. And you can manipulate the materials, change them, change the specularity, the shininess of it all. You can import picture files, as textures, give it more tactility looking too as well. Yeah, just a wide range of texturing tools that you have at your disposal. And not to mention, once you're done with your model, whether it's a character model, such as this little cartoon character, you can make a skeletal system or an armature. That way, you can set it up so that once you want to start animating a character, you can make sure you have your controls at juncture points of the entire figure, and then just move them around like so that it can animate once you start animation. And plus it's tedious work and it allows you with the tools to adjust the whole smoothness of it all. How each areas of the model is influenced by a bone too as well. You can adjust that with just as easy as a paintbrush. Next, you got animation tools. When you want to put motion, you want to put the acting in a character that you have modeled. And then, you have a whole variety of manipulations for doing your animations, including a dope sheet, just to help define your timing, graph editor, just to define even more of the animations that you want to add. You have a full timeline. You can import a sound file, to sync up with the actions of your animation. Also, you can have fur and hair creation. Make a teddy bear, make it all furry. Long, short, too as well. You can add smoke, too as well. Smoke, fire, lights, even different types of liquids. And even there's a simulation for basic cloth. So you can have a cloth, just move it around just naturalistically. And not only that, there's more. It also has a built-in compositor too as well. So, if you have live action film plates, and if you want to do work on green screen or blue screen, then you can use, a wider variety of tools, just to eliminate the green screen and sub in with a 3D environment that you've made. Next, it has a built-in video editor. It's basic as it is. It has your basic cuts. And transitions too as well. You can import, sound files too as well to sync up with your movie files, and much, much more. Finally, this is a new development. development, and it's called Grease Pencil. And what it is, it's a drawing tool that you can actually draw in 3D space. But they've developed it even further so that you can use it as an animation tool, a flat 2D or classically animated animation tool. And people have used this tool to doing quick storyboards as well as rough animations or light cuts too as well. And plus the system is compatible with various tablet devices, like a Wacom tablet or other third-party developers. And lastly, you have a renderer, so you have your basic cameras. Once you set up your scenes, you have all your environments modeled out with your characters, with how they look, with the textures and materials. And then you're ready to wanting to produce a movie or a picture, and that's where rendering comes in. And you can choose with the different types of renderers to produce a final picture or a final movie. You can choose between Blender internal renderer, which is the simplest basic render with basic colors as well. And as well as you can go for a more realistic approach, more realistic looking scenes through the Cycles rendering engine, which is a new development as well. And lastly, Blender has a game engine. Yes, it's basic as it is. You can import your models, and then you have a complete node editing system where you just connect all the different systems to whatever controls that you have, whether it's keys that you normally play online, in your favorite game, PC game too as well, and have it attached and linked up to the character or to whatever 3D models that you want performing in the game. So yeah, all of this, which leads to the next point is, it's free. Free. Who doesn't like free? Free is good. I certainly enjoy free stuff too as well. Free food, free beer, even like free cake too as well. So, yeah, but mind you, how far the idea of free goes so far is that with Blender, it's no cost barrier entry point, which means you don't have to pay in order to download Blender. You can just download it freely. You can use it for your personal use. You can use it for commercial use too as well. Yeah, but with the features that I just listed, which was a long one that I had to really summarize, is that when comparing Blender's feature with the major 3D programs, used in Hollywood as well as TV and gaming too. You can see that for comparable features that you get with Blender, with let's say like Maya or 3D Studio Max, this is how much you pay for it. These are all in Canadian dollars, and just to work it out, because Maya and 3D Max, they're subscription based now, so we don't buy it outright. That's how much it's cost per month, per year, and per 3 years. Whereas some of the other packages, you still do get the chance to buy it outright. But still, these are the price points where, it's only affordable for companies who manage studios, whether it's mid-sized studios or large studios. And that's why a lot of studios in Hollywood can afford it. This is within their price points, and they need to get the job done. Plus, these prices reflect, your maintenance costs, your services costs, help too as well, not to mention all the other things associated to how much a company pays for a license for using one of these applications. So yeah, so that's just the free, and free can only get you so much. So the next step is Blender is open source. Now, this is one of the best selling points to me, because why? What it is with Blender, if anyone's skilled in programming code, whether they're versed in C, C++, or any other programming languages. So what they can do is download, Blender, the code, the actual code file, look into the code, and they can make some alterations, add new features, squash bugs, fix it, possibly patch it, temporarily too as well as adding more and more features, And so a lot of the developers spend their own time outside of what they do daily, and submit it to a site like Graphical, where a lot of the different forks or the different versions of Blenders have specific features that they have refined, through programming and people can freely download it and try it out. There's no cost associated to that. So the next step is community, and Blender has a really big, sizable community these days right now. There's tons of people who want to venture in Blender, experiment with Blender, and one of the websites that's good for it is blenderartist.org, and that way you can sign up for free, there's no cost, and if you have any questions on learning how to use Blender, you can find some of your answers and solutions in here, and people are always generous to help you, whenever you have some issues on how do I model, a spaceship, or how do I model a skeleton too as well. So it's really, the Blender community has always been helpful. Yeah. So these are the major 4 points, that I've outlined, and each of the points, they only go so far. Like, for instance, every point has their pros and every point has their cons. Particularly, for features too as well. Sometimes, a program in the market, a 3D animation program, might have the best features, the best solutions, but sometimes it doesn't gain traction in the marketplace too as well. We've seen that in the 3D landscape with Softimage owned by Autodesk, and Autodesk in 2015 decided to discontinue it. I've known a lot of friends who've been trained in Softimage said it has one of the best character animation tools, better than other programs too as well. For free, free can only get you so much, if the program is lacking for what you need it to do in a tight deadline, then you get what you pay for it. That, I guess that's the mantra is what. And then open source, I've seen a lot of open source projects that, have basically just, withered and, discontinued. And no longer being supported by the original programmers or anyone who wanted to take up in maintaining the program itself. And we've seen, a lot of developers, move on with their lives and fall disinterest, and therefore, the program itself, it becomes, it becomes, dead, in other words, too as well. And that can happen. And the same thing can happen with the community too as well. If you don't have a good community, no one's going to help you. A community has to be bound by certain things that props itself up and keep everything alive, the whole 3D scene alive, especially with Blender. So this was more like a soul-searching exercise for me, because it's always been a recurring theme, an issue in the Blender community. So the last point, which again may be obvious, but it's the glue that binds all of these points together. And that's called empowerment. Yes, empowerment. You too can have the power to create great 3D content too as well. So with empowerment, many people have created a whole array and assortment of 3D works. After downloading Blender, spending time learning, how to use the functionalities of Blender, they were able to create some of these samples of really great looking artwork in general. And the program is only as good as the person using it, the artist with the creativity too as well. Everyone has different skill sets, everyone has different sets of creativity, everything unique too as well. And the one thing that I have noticed, I have forwarded a question online in the Blender community, whether it's on Facebook, the Blender group on Facebook, or even in the blenderartist.org, and I ask them, why does Blender still exist? And some of the consensus seems to point that, I use Blender because I cannot afford to buy Maya or 3D Studio Max. I can program and add functionalities to Blender because I wanted to use Max or Maya, but I cannot afford it. Or I cannot download a pirated version of Maya or Max or Lightwave, etc. because I wanted to do some 3D artwork. And that was the consensus that I got. And it's really powerful because it was driven by passion. It was driven by a determination to learn something new, learn something that would help them grow as a person, grow creatively. So, and empowerment really goes very far, because right now, the Blender developers noticed, throughout the years, and they've initiated since 2003 a whole raft of projects called open movie projects. And what these projects entail is that for each project that they start, they would also at the same time improve the functionalities of the program, of Blender. So for every step, each short film that you see on the screen represents a step of Blender functionality being improved, new features added to as well. And not only that, once each of the short films are completed, the short films in their final delivery, meaning final movie file, plus all of the 3D models used in each of these projects, become open source and released to the public. That way, people can learn from how everything is set up, and everything is tied to how an animation production environment had evolved, in CG. So yeah, and it's still ongoing too as well. And also, the Blender Foundation, in order for them to actually have a self-supporting, role in creating these open movie projects, they've always have started, donation campaigns for funds to be used to pay the individuals who have participated in the production of these short films too as well. And it goes even further, even Blender Foundation, had started doing what's called the Blender Cloud. That way, for a monthly subscription, you can actually take part and look at all the progressions of these open movie projects throughout the production pipeline process too as well. So, and it goes further, even more. In the Blender community, there have been long-time Blender users that took the initiative and decided to start their own businesses, based off of around the Blender community for the needs serving the artists who use Blender. Blender Market is one example where people have programmed plugins or add-ons to extend functionalities of the Blender software, and they sell them, and they also make money. The same thing with CG Cookie, Blender Guru, Creative Shrimp. These are tutorial sites, where you can learn how to do any style in Blender, whether it's a realistic or cartoony style too as well. Learn the process of how to rig your models for animation, or even prep a model as a game model for your favorite game, whether it's on the PC or on Android, or even iOS. So, along with this, the Blender Foundation also created, a Blender network. That way it recognizes that active Blender users, are also networked and connected to organizations and companies, who need help with what they need to do, whether it's 3D content for entertainment, 3D content for VR or AR, and you name it, all sorts of, even gaming too as well. So that also helps prop up the community. So yeah, and throughout the years of Blender's existence, they've had a range of supports from major companies too as well, particularly from AMD, Dell, Intel, and NVIDIA, because those companies, they donate their products, to Blender, the Blender Foundation, so that the Blender Foundation can do the work for their open movie projects. So yeah, and every year, these companies, help support a Blender conference. It's a whole big meetup in Amsterdam. That's where the Blender Foundation is based out of. And they have throwing in their full support. But later on, I'll explain with these particular companies, Canton Animation, Theory Studios, and the Nimble Collective, because they've gone a lot further too as well. And companies started using Blender in production pipelines. One of the issues, or topics of conversations in the Blender community is why isn't Blender used in major Hollywood features? So now we're starting to see that, particularly from Canton Animation studios, or even small game studios like Yukon Games in Toronto. or you mastered Brain Bites in Germany too as well. And there's many, but these are the prime examples. Yeah, but going towards Tangent Animation out of Toronto, they did a gutsiest move, and I couldn't believe I read that they did this. Tangent Animation is traditionally a Maya animation studio, and for the production of Ozzy, which is a Spain and Canadian co-production, what they did was they got rid of Maya, and they used Blender entirely in their production pipeline process, from start to finish. Yeah, and this is the gutsiest move because this is one of the animation studios, the bigger animation studios that employ up to 200 people, in their studios between the Toronto office and Winnipeg, and they did that bold move. Even the co-founder of the company, Tangent Animation, he was a programmer in research and development at the original company that made and created Maya. So, and he wanted to do this just as an endeavor because, why? Because he felt that, that some of the tools in Blender can succeed in a production environment, such as making an animated feature film. And the second project, from other studios, particularly Barnyard Visual Effects and Fury Studios in LA, they created backdrops, environments for the Amazon Studios series Man in the High Castle. And it was a lot of work, a lot of back and forth, but they made it work. They made it work with other softwares in their current production pipeline. And when they were prepping up for this project, they had to hire a whole bunch of Blender artists and other artists who were willing to learn Blender too as well, as an extension of their tool set, of the normal tool set as 3D artists. So yeah. Empowerment also extends to learning too as well. There's a whole slew of educational institutions that start offering teaching Blender, whether it's in class or distance courseware, whether it's online like Berklee College of Music. That was a complete shocker for me because a music college learning media, and they would afford to purchase, licenses like Maya or 3D Studio Max, but they chose Blender too as well. Same with all the other schools, especially Vancouver Community Colleges 2 years ago. They started teaching Blender. Pepe School and a dedicated animation school based out of Madrid, Spain. They teach their students the process of animations using Blender and 3D Studio Max. Even coming up, the Toronto Public Library, offering Blender programs, in their pop-up labs seminars. So yeah, and going further, there are online resources, such as Udemy. I've used Udemy Blender video tutorials, and it was great, and it was affordable too as well, not too expensive. Pluralsight, another major tutorial resource, used to be called Blender Digital Tutors. They're offering a lot of Blender courses, and same thing with lynda.com. But I don't know if you know about lynda.com through the Halifax Public Library. Anyone? Yeah, you do. But usually lynda.com is monthly subscriptions. But with a library card, you can all you need is your library card number, and you're set. And then you can get into lynda.com for free, without paying a monthly subscription. And it could be anything outside of Blender too as well. And I thought that was amazing. When my wife told me about this, I was just blown away because it helps gain accessibility to people who are interested in doing 3D animation, particularly if they want to start out. And it's no wonder that, a lot of people that I've met, who started out in 3D animation, they started out with Blender because it was an accessible tool that you can download for free and try it out. There's many resources, to choose from these days online. So yeah, so that's pretty much a nutshell of the development of Blender throughout its years, and it's hard to believe that it's been 24 years since Blender was created. Does anybody have any questions?
So I may have missed this at the beginning. What do you use professionally at your work? Do you use Blender? Or
we use Maya. Yeah,
okay.
Maya, because it was, with respect to DHX,
Right.
it's the best tool for getting the job done for a production pipeline, especially with tight deadlines
Yeah.
too as well. And that's what we use. You know.
Is Blender a bit slower, for example? You're saying in time frame, but is it just is it a performance?
It's just more on the topic of usability, because there are some things that 3D artists, when they've adopted a 3D program professionally, and they're used to a certain workflow too as well, whereas when they see Blender and want to try it out, it's not really part of their workflow, because one of the qualities of Blender that seem to put off a lot of professional 3D artists is the selection of 3D objects, you know, via the right mouse button instead of the left mouse button.
Those little things.
Yeah, but you know, there was a developer who helped develop Blender, and he explained that the reason why he did that was because it's to reduce carpal tunnel syndrome in the hand and in the arms, and that was the only reason. And plus, what was it? If you're left-handed using Blender, so having your mouse buttons, having the right mouse button as your selection tool for a left-handed person, it can be a normal left button selection to them, meaning to the right, you know, yeah. So yeah, that's pretty much why was it DHX, you know, chooses Maya, you know, over let's say like Blender. And plus at the time, Blender wasn't really, let's say, production ready, because it hasn't really had the experience to go through the paces of going through making a series or animated film, you know, in a production pipeline that they've designed. You know, so going back to square one for any established studio might seem to be a lot more daunting vis-a-vis spend more money, you know, trying to reconfigure everything as well.
Do you think there might be, there might be more sort of take up as companies do things like what Softimage did, where they said, or we're saying, oh, we're not going to support that program anymore. Or I know Maya and 3D Studio Max are sort of I don't know, I think isn't one being merged with the other or something like big companies will suddenly arbitrarily get rid of the, I know with Apple and like Final Cut Pro, I think.
Or even like Shake.
Yeah, or Shake, and they, you know, and if, at least with an open source platform, you know it's not going anywhere. I find that with a lot of my software development tools, similar things, like I can use the open source one because I know no one's going to mess with it. Yeah, well,
the most intriguing thing is that, it's the community that really helped prop up Blender, because, they've had a lot of, they continue to support it, which is unbelievable when you compare it to any other open source software. And, you know, any other open source software, let's say like GIMP, for instance, where it has maybe like, 3 dedicated coders too as well. And that's it. Whereas Blender, they got, in the Blender Institute in Amsterdam, they have a team of 20 at the most, you know, developing Blender, which is interesting because, and that's a really good segue into what I like to talk about, which is the meat, you know, more or less why I wanted to do this talk is the future of Blender, because with all the developments, you know, it's going into a very interesting path right now. Did you have a question?
Yeah. Does it run on Mac? Like, does it matter what?
Yes. It runs on the Mac computers. It also runs on Linux. That's the original operating system of origin when Blender as well was created. You know. Yeah. So it used to run on many more platforms, but now being Windows, Mac, and Linux, you know, and those are the top 3 operating system environments that the Blender developers support. You know.
And what's the comparable program with Adobe CC?
One comparable that I could think of, I'm not really sure about another one, but the one I'm thinking of, you do have 3D capabilities. There are 2 actually. One is Photoshop. You can import your 3D models. You know, they accept a wide range of different file formats of 3D models. The other is Adobe After Effects, and you can import it. It's via, as far as I understand it, it's via a plugin, you know, that you can import 3D text if you're doing motion graphics.
So I could use Blender and can I import things into there?
Yes, as long as it can import specific 3D objects like an OBJ or an FBX or a DXF. On Blender's site, there's a description on what it can accept to import into the program as well. Any other questions? Okay, so I'm going to talk about the future of Blender. So what is the future of Blender these days right now? It's been going steadily in its 24-year run. And what does Blender have to offer down the road? And the answer to this is version 2.8. The last major iteration that Blender was involved in terms of improving functionality was 2.5. 2.5 was a direct overhaul. The codes were cleaned up, they were modified, they were simplified. With Blender 2.8, they're going further in making the whole coding structure that makes up Blender, much more viable, meaning it's cleaner, not convoluted, and it'll work. So, and one of the first things that they're doing is they're going to revamp the user interface in terms redo the usability of Blender. That's one of their target goals too as well. So they want to get Blender 2.8 ready for SIGGRAPH, which is the big 3D animation conference held every year, usually in LA or in the state of California. This year, it's going to be held for the second time in Vancouver, early August. And the Blender Foundation will be there to unveil, a usable new version of Blender 2.8. And this is where I'm going to quickly show you, what it is. Now, this version of Blender that I'm showing you, it's not stable, so it still has bugs, and it's not ready for doing any important work if you want to do an animation. But this is to show just as a proof of concept of what Blender 2.8 will be. So the first thing that the Blender developers recognize are trends in the current state of 3D animation. And one of these important trends is real-time rendering. And real-time rendering, we've seen that so far in the landscape with the Unity game engine. The Unity game engine had, the company itself had allied with Neil Blomkamp, who has his own company called Old Studio. And they released successive shorts, using a real-time rendering engine like a game engine, like Unity too as well. So the creator of Blender, Ton Roosendahl, recognizes this and feels this is in the right direction, for the evolution of the program itself. So what you get is usually, in the rendering process, you have to dedicate your computers, even like for big companies, banks of computers, servers, to help render out a scene of a highest quality like this as a movie, like Pixar does for their feature films. So what real-time rendering does, it'll allow you to make changes on the fly, changes to the materials, the colors, even the lighting too as well. So what this does offer is you get, proper lighting effects, like blooms, even like, lens flares too as well. They even adopted fog atmosphere, more volumetric, smoky lights, light qualities, materials that look like they have pores, that have indentations to define details too as well. And this is done on real time. As you can see, I'm just interactively moving around the camera and then just moving, this glass nearby the fireplace too as well. And and these days, real-time rendering, is attractive, especially for companies in tight budget deadlines. Because why? Because what ends up happening is that the client would ask and say, it doesn't look right, can you change the lighting? And then you can change the lighting to go dimmer or brighter, and it does it on the fly, split second. They can ask you to change the texture for certain brickwork or even books too as well. And you can do that interactively, instantaneously, provided you have a really powerful computer setup too as well. And this is one of the major improvements or additions to Blender these days. Also, you do have different renderers. This is, what's called the Eve renderer, and then you could switch it to what's called a clay renderer, a simple shaded quality, rendering in your 3D viewport, and you can still interactively move around different items too as well. Yeah. It's just there. This clay-looking rendering viewport, it was made for modelers as well to do sculpting of complicated complicated-looking models with real high detail too as well, interactively too. And not only that, there's many more features that they want to implement. The developers want to implement, so that they can get it ready for SIGGRAPH this year. So I'm going to head back to the slideshow. So that's the future of Blender right now as we speak. So with Blender 2.8, now they have the opportunity to make Blender better, add more features. And this is one of 2 open source movie projects that they're doing right now in production. It's called Hero, and they haven't really revealed what the summary of the story is all about. But the only thing that they have mentioned is that they're putting their efforts in improving the grease pencil 2D animation tool, as an outright production ready tool, for this. And so that, by the time that they complete it in March, there will be a short ready to be played on YouTube, or Vimeo too as well. And it will be open source too as well. All the materials, all the models will be open source for people to play around with, or even use, whether it's for personal use or commercial use too. And another open movie project that they're doing right now in pre-production is called Spring, and this is a totally 3D animated short. And the story revolves around a little girl and her dog, and they set about going into the valley and encountering interesting characters too as well. And they've been doing this for months now. These are the production art, that has been contributed for the production of this short animated film too as well. And not only that, they had some models ready too as well of the main character and her little dog, and plus the sets, blocked out, roughly, without any textures or materials. So it's slated to be completed sometime in around 2019. They have a lot more work to do, a lot more planning to do. So yeah, and that's pretty much the goal. A lot of the lessons learned from these 2 productions will help the developers come up with really strong, robust tools in Blender. And by the time they release the short films, another version of Blender will be released for everyone to play around with, and even download these models, so they can incorporate it into their own 3D content too as well. So that's pretty much it. These are the known resources, for anyone who wants to learn about Blender. You can go to any of these resources. They have absolutely free video tutorials to choose from, especially with YouTube too as well. Open Visual Effects is a really interesting site because the person behind Open Visual Effects, he's a veteran of the Hollywood visual effects scene for over 22 years. And he's adopted Blender for his own use. He does freelance for numerous studios, particularly for Cosa FX, one of the newer visual effects studios in Hollywood, and they have done work for the Lethal Weapon series as well as Westwood. And he incorporates a lot of Blender into some of the scenes he's been working on. And plus, he's also a veteran of the once Rhythm Cues studios too as well. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for the presentation. Thank you very much for coming. So, question time.
Where can we watch the movies that they're making or have made?
Yeah, you can. They're usually released on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you really want to know when, if you want news updates on the developments of these open movie projects, Blender Nation is a good site because they've been very consistent in promoting news from the Blender community, as well as 3D animation news too as well. So YouTube is your best spot as well. And sometimes the blenderartist.org discussion forum, they're pretty good because everyone who's in tune with what's going on in the Blender community, they would announce it too as well, and there would be a link, associated with it. Yeah.
I have heard about some sort of 2D animations in the Blender 3D engine.
Yes.
How does that work?
To be honest, I don't know specifically because what's happening is that with the game engine, I don't know, I haven't played much of the game engine
Oh, wait a
personally.
minute, I mean the 3D engine. Well,
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't mean
Okay.
the games.
No, sure, yeah.
I'm used to saying game engine, sorry.
Don't worry.
I'm wondering because the 2D animations in a 3D space,
Yes.
there have been,
Yes.
do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so what they are, they're actually a set of curves that when you use the grease pencil tool, they're actually curves that can be converted into polygons, and they interact in the 3D space too as well. Yeah, I can just quickly show you a demo video. Let's see. So this is the look of grease pencil, after when it's being used and after, when it's done through Blender too as well. And there is further what's called post-processing developments too as well, after when this animation is rendered. So what you see, this is the Blender interface, and it's using the grease pencil. So it's really, they're still 3D objects. It's just drawn almost as if on a flat surface. And you can manipulate the tool too as well. So you can shape the eyes to form different expressions for the mouth, for the eyes, or even for the form itself of the character, or even for the plants. And still, the camera is still 3D. So it's pretty neat. And with the infinite canvas idea, because it's still a 3D environment, 3D space, so you can go as small as you want. So it almost looks like it's treating it like vectors too as well. Yeah, as you can see, you can manipulate the size, the scale, you name it, using the assortment of tools that has featured in grease pencil. Yeah, and you can zoom in further and further and further. Yeah, so heading back in the freestyle rendering. It's a separate rendering task in Blender that gives you a nice 2D cel-shaded, cartoon-shaded, quality-looking animation. So, and I think it's pretty neat, the way that it has evolved with grease pencil. Grease pencil, when it was first created, it was mainly a notation tool that you can make notes right on the 3D environment so that you can say, it's like, hey, fix this walk. Here, there's a demonstration with another open source package called Krita. It's a 2D painting package, and now Krita offers 2D animation features like a timeline. So you can import your rendered frames from grease pencil and then just further refine it using the painting tools in Krita. It's all just still a successive series of rendered pictures, making up the animation, as you can see. I know this is done in a time-lapse video quickly too as well. But this gives you a good sense of what grease pencil offers in Blender, in a tool like Blender. Yeah, and this is going to be further improved with the open source movie project Hero, where they want to make it more intuitive so that any artist can actually use this tool. And the most interesting thing for the development for Blender 2.8 is that two companies, two major studios in the industry are helping to support, sponsor, by donating funds to developers over at the Blender Institute. Again, Canton Animation Studio in Toronto is funding two Blender developers. They also have their own team of developers to develop the Blender Cycles render engines, photorealistic rendering engine, as well as also there's a company in the States called the Nimble Collective, which was formed by former DreamWorks animators, and what they're doing is they are funding one additional developer to help develop Blender 2.8 as we speak. So yeah, so I hope that gives you a good sense of what Blender offers, even from the past and down the road too as well. Yeah. So thank you very much.